Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Happy Halloween. I'm John Bartz with Network Consulting Services. Welcome to the IT Onboarding Horrors webinar today. I'm here with Bryan Hadzik, who's going to teach us how to take the fright out of employee onboarding. Bryan, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Happy Halloween.
Welcome to our new platform. So let's go ahead and get started on IT Onboarding Horrors.
All right. Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Just like John said, I want to reiterate, I like it when we do these things very interactively. So please stop, ask questions, use that Q&A. I'll try and answer them as we go along and as we're talking about it, but also at the end, we'll kind of wrap it up and try and go through some of the questions, make sure everyone gets their questions answered. So I'm going to show you a demonstration today of a lot of Ivanti technologies. And I'm going to try and show you from the user's perspective. So far too many times we are, when we go and look at different technologies, we want to look under the hood. Whereas, if you're trying to go look at whether you want to buy a car or not, you should go and take it for a test drive. You should see how it feels. What is the user experience? Instead of cracking open the hood and looking underneath to start with. So I'm going to show you from a user's perspective, but if you want to, or if we need to jump into it, we can dive into the back end and see what a technician's or an analyst or an engineer's perspective would be on the back end. So I've noticed a really funny trend on LinkedIn, and if you look at LinkedIn at all, you probably see something similar to this, and it's a picture of a new employee's desk on the first day. And I shamelessly stole this off of LinkedIn from a company, and look at what it shows the user. It says, you've landed here on the first day, we care about you. Look at the swag we got you. We got you pens, we've got you a jacket, we've got you little notebooks. And I always thought that was kind of an interesting, really it is a marketing thing more than anything. But I always said, well, that's cool. I like users like jackets, and that's nice. And I see the stress squeeze balls. That's cool. But I always ask the question, well, did the user have access to all their applications on day one? Were they able to log into the system? Were they able to use the systems that they were entitled to? And that's something that a lot of organizations say. The short answer is no. Onboarding is a struggle, is a challenge. We hear about onboarding, sometimes late in the conversation. Hey, someone's starting next week, or they're starting today. They need access to a certain application that they should probably be entitled to, but they don't have access to that application. By weeks or months until they're actually fully on board into the ecosystem. So what we want to talk about today is what Ivanti sees that life cycle to look like. And so we're going to go through and we're going to hire some people and see what an experience could look like. Now, this isn't the only way to do it. This is just an example of some things that you can do as part of the onboarding process. You can easily customize it and change it to however you want to. So kind of keep that in mind, is that this is just a sample. So here's what I have. I have a fake company. It's called Vertrillo. And I use it to kind of demonstrate all the different products. And sadly, Vertrillo, you're not going to get a cool sweater or swag or stress balls on your first day. But our goal is to make it so that you actually have access to all of your applications. That's really what we want it to look like. So let's kind of walk through what that would look like and see it from an end user's experience. So the first question that I always have is, where does hiring start? And the real question is not with IT. How did we ever get roped up in this process? This is truly a process with HR. So HR really should be kicking off this. So I have an HR system here. It's called Orange HRM. This is not a Ivanti product. This is just a product that is an open source HRIS tool. And I'm going to, at the start, kind of simulate what it's like to be an HR person when I go and hire someone. And what's going to happen is our system is going to automatically integrate with that and automatically provision the original lifecycle of that user, keyed off of information that we pulled over from HR. So, we don't have to put in a service request, gone to the paper forms that I have to fill out with that information in it. It's just going to automatically create that user for us. So let's go ahead and log into our HR system here, and let's go hire someone. So I'm going to go here to the Add Employee option. If I can click on it. Oh. Okay, we're going to add an employee. and we're going to hire Mr. Michael Myers. We're going to hire Michael Myers. He seems like a great guy. We're going to go in here and go down to his contact details, and we are going to put in a phone number for him. So I'm going to put in his cell phone number, which happens to be my cell phone number, 5938. So we're going to hit save to that. I actually have kind of a screen mirroring technology here, so we're going to see what this looks like from the user's perspective. Now, you can do this in multiple different ways, but you can, as part of my process, what I did was after I create an Active Directory account, I'm actually going to take that user information and I'm going to send a text message to the end user. So what I do in my system is I synchronize every 1 minute. So within 1 minute of that entry into HR, it's going to kick off my workflow to make it go through that process. So depending on where that timer was, it'll take a, give or take a maximum of 1 minute for that that text message to come in. Now, again, this is just my example. Maybe you want to have it be a more specific process, or it needs to go through approvals or different things like that. Those kinds of things are completely allowed. So it looks like a new text message there. I'm going to open that up right here, and up at the top you can see I got a text message right there. And what does it say? Welcome to Virtual, Michael. Your username is M Myers. It says the support number, and it gives me the help desk support number. And it tells me I can log in to my VDI instance and gives me the URL for that, and then it tells me what the password is. So, okay, that's great. Now, as an end user, maybe in my example, we have a lot of VDI, and so the user's not going to be issued a device, but they're going to be connecting via VDI. So, great. Let's go interact with that. So let's go to vdi.virtualo.com. Whoops, I was signed in, so I'm going to sign out and sign in as Mr. M. Myers, if I can spell it correctly. And the password was that. So we're going to sign in. We can see that we have a Windows 10 machine that's been provisioned to us. We're going to go ahead and click on that. Open it up. We are going to authenticate against that. M. Myers. All right, so as that connects, let's talk a little bit about how the process inside of Virtualo is happening. So the idea being that our HR system is now the source of truth. That really is where everything comes from. And when we recognize that a user is created in that system, we're going to run through an enablement process based on their entitlements. So we can actually do things like look up their title of who they are. So I can see, maybe you're a doctor or a lawyer or a technician level 5. And then I can create entitlements based on that. So because I have the entitlement of an employee in North America, I have access to X or access to Y. So it's not just kind of all users are the same. Our entitlement engine kicks in and makes it so that the users can be very specific to what their job function is. And so, not everyone's equal. We're going to make sure that the entitlements are for the appropriate people. Okay, so here I am landed on the desktop as Mr. Michael Myers. And what are some common things that users do as part of their onboarding process? And users want to go and customize and change their environment. And so, a user may say, oh, I'm going to go download Chrome. And so they open up the web, they start searching for Chrome. And, for anyone that's been to any kind of download site lately, this is kind of what it looks like, right? What is legitimate? Why are they downloading it? Why are they bringing it into our environment? All of those things are, a big concern. And the problem is that normal technology, specifically Windows, has treated the fact that a user can download an executable as a tacit approval that they can execute it. And we don't know where it came from. We don't know what it is and why it's happening. And so it is a little bit dangerous. So even if it's something that's legitimate, in my mind, yeah, Chrome is a legitimate thing, but what about all the things that aren't Chrome, that are malicious software that they're potentially bringing down into the ecosystem? What do you want to do about that? So I'm a regular user. I have downloaded Chrome or insert whatever kind of other application that I've brought into the ecosystem, and I'm going to execute it. And what's going to happen is our application control engine is going to kick in. And application control is going to recognize from a trusted perspective that we don't trust this executable. And that's kind of a funny thing to say, you know, how do you build that trust? Application whitelisting and blacklisting technologies have been around for a long time, but they've so predominantly focused on lists where you need to actually have a list of, you know, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 applications, you know, some very, very large amount. You know, that's just impossible to maintain. You cannot keep track of that. I don't care what anyone says. It's an unrealistic goal to be able to do that. So we found that whitelisting applications turn into some of the biggest pieces of shelfware out there, where you test it out, seems like a fun thing. Yeah, it's going to work. We put it in the lab, it's all right. And then we get into the real world and realize, hey, it's just never practical. So we took a different approach with application control and said, we're going to focus on trust. And if you kind of think about it for a minute, you can make some pretty broad statements. And you can say that if we, and that being, you know, the IT staff or someone on the help desk or a service account or, you know, something like that, if we put the executable on the machine, we're going to trust it. If the user put the executable on the machine, we don't trust it. And that actually rings true 99.9% of the time. You know, most of the time they're not introducing executables in the environment. Sometimes they are, you know, maybe like you, when you downloaded the Zoom installer, you know, there are some exceptions to that, but when you really start adding up those exceptions, there's, you know, a handful or a couple dozen, there's not hundreds or thousands. And so we manage it based on trust. This user, Mike Myers, brought this executable into the environment. I don't trust it. I'm going to deny it from being installed. And you can see there's even a little comment right there. Please check the software portal for authorized applications. So that's great. Why don't we have our own little version of an app store so users can, you know, get their own applications? They don't have to call up and open a ticket, something like that. So I'm going to press OK to that, and then I'm going to open up the software portal, of which I put an icon on the desktop here. And now I've given the user a way to interact with applications and go get applications. So I can click on this button right here. I have gone and packaged Chrome for them with my installer and my version, and gives us the ability to you know, deliver that to the end user. And the beauty of this is they never had to call in and ask for it. You know, it's going to deliver it right to them. It's what they wanted. They didn't call us, and that's a win in their book, and that's a win in our book, right? So we have a couple of questions here I'll answer while we're waiting for Chrome to install. Any IT security concerns on sending Mr. Michael Myers his password via text? So that all depends. You know, this was my use case. I think it's an interesting use case to show off the flexibility of the tool. I don't think necessarily everyone's going to be doing that, delivering the password via text. So that's completely up to you. As a matter of fact, it's not even technically built into the system. You just have the ability to integrate with lots of different applications, and I integrated with Twilio, which is a text messaging application, to demonstrate what it looks like. So I'll let you guys decide how that works. The workflow that you create could do almost anything you can imagine. So for example, maybe I'm going to send an email to their manager, and it's going to have the password for them, or it's going to do some other mechanism, or automatically generate a password. And you know, there's the sky's the limit in how that delivery can happen. So whatever you imagine from a delivery perspective, we can, you know, help facilitate it. Text messages is kind of a fun thing to show off that we can, you know, interact with someone that way. All right, so another question, does this link directly into Active Directory, and can it notify multiple groups within the organization the new employee has created, i.e. IT, customer support, and the security team? We're going to ignore that. That's our patch management engine. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The gist of it is absolutely. So we create a workflow for what an onboarding process looks like. So if you haven't interacted with us before, we spend a lot of times helping organizations install ITSM solutions. So things like Ivanti's service management solution. And one of the most perfect examples of what people use is an onboarding request offering. So what we do is we sit down with the customer and we whiteboard out what that workflow would look like. And, what are the phases? Who do we notify? What applications do they need to get? The difference between that and what we're talking about a little bit today is the automation component of it, because that workflow has a lot of tasks. Create a task to have a human go and notify someone. That's no fun. That just adds complexity and time, and they forgot to do it and things like that. What our goal with the identity solution is to take that human out of the equation. So absolutely, I could create a workflow that sends an email to, their manager. It sends an email to the team that someone new is starting. Anything that I want to. I can notify whoever I want, and then ideally integrate with those systems. Give them access to the Salesforce application that they need. Go connect to Dropbox and provision their account. Do lots of different connections so that when we're onboarding, the goal of this really is to make it not really an IT function anymore, that we're helping facilitate it on the back end, but no human in IT was clicking the keyboard to hire a person. It is slaving off of some other system, recognizing that that's happening, and then, executing against that. So that's our kind of concept in this onboarding process, is you could configure it kind of however you wanted to. Okay, so it looks like our Chrome has been installed. So now if I'm a user and I want to execute Chrome, there's the icon. I'm ready to go. I'm a happy user. I got what I wanted to, and notice I haven't had to call to the help desk. I didn't have to submit a ticket. Right there, software portal was able to give me access to what I wanted to. Okay, so I'm a user. I'm hired at Virtrillo. I'm ready to start working. What kind of things should I do next? I need to access my ERP application. I'm a sales guy or whatever, and I need to access ERP. So I'm going to go and open up a request to my ERP application. Look at that. I got an icon on the desktop. How convenient. It's set up and it's ready for me to go, and I'll connect to it. Whoops. Well, maybe I'm not going to connect to it. I'm getting an error message. I can't connect to the database. And so what do users do? They get an error message. What do they do? I like to listen to kind of the futurists where they talk about it, and they say, oh, well, the future is people are going to tweet at you, or they're going to use their Alexa to use AI to something. Those are cool ideas. I love them, but I live in the real world. And in the real world, people pick up the phone and they call. And until we have a generational die-off, 30, 40 years from now, people still gravitate towards the phone as a way to solve their problems. And so that's why I sent them the support email or the support phone number in that text that I sent out to my user to introduce. And so, me as a user, this is broken. I'm going to call in to the help desk. What's going to happen? So let's call in real quick. Let's jump back over to our phone. Here's our support number that I gave them. I'm going to go ahead and call into it and put it on speakerphone, and we'll walk through that process.
Thank you for calling Virtrillo. Your call may be monitored or recorded for quality purposes. To speak to the IT service desk, please press 1. To speak to human resources, please press 2.
So you can see it doesn't have to be just for IT. It can be for other departments as well with our voice solution. So we're going to speak to the IT department. We're going to press number 1.
Hello. Thank you for calling the Virtrillo IT service desk.
We are experiencing an ERP system login failure.
So
if you would like to create a ticket for this and receive an automated callback upon resolution, please press 1.
Hey, I'm having that exact problem. So I'm going to press 1
to disconnect.
Now, it's going to read back to me the incident number. You guys don't need to hear that boring part, but look at what happened. We're having a major incident or a master incident, and a user calls in. If we have a lot of users calling in because we're having issues, does that make our life easier? Does that help us solve the problem faster? No, it's the opposite. It just drowns us in it. So you have the ability to declare a master incident in our incident management system, and then that reports out through our voice automation software to tell the user that that's happening. Now, in my fantasy world, it's easy to fix it, so I'm going to go and fix that ERP system. And well, wait a minute, the help desk is calling me. Oh, okay, let's see what they have to say.
This is an automated message regarding ticket number 11711. 9 is closed, which will greatly improve your day and bring a smile to your face. Goodbye.
So, when's the last time that the help desk reached out to me kind of proactively like that after we've solved the problem? So you can see that after someone went in and resolved that master incident, I, as a user, was subscribed to that incident, and I can have it respond via email as well and things like that. But an outbound call to a user to inform them that the problem is solved. So our voice automation software is really cool that it can interact with users at more than a level of just hey, we received a phone call and an analyst picked it up. So let's go through a couple of other scenarios that a user would want to do. They're going to have problems with and if I wanted to show off what that looked like, the problem's been solved, they come back in and they hit refresh, and magically their ERP system is now functioning. It's that easy to fix the ERP system in my universe. So let's go and walk through an example of a user forgetting their password. So for some reason I don't have that text message, or it's a couple days later and I've forgotten that. A user wants to call in with a password reset. So let's go ahead and call back in one more time.
Thank you for calling Bertrillo. Your call may be monitored or recorded for quality purposes. To speak to the IT service desk, please press 1. To speak to human resources, please press 2.
So we've had some cool examples of people, doing things like payroll, where people needed to call in. Maybe they're non-computer users and they need to ask about their payroll information, their HR information. So don't think this is just an IT solution. It works for lots of different stuff. So we're going to talk to
Hello,
IT.
thank you for calling the Bertrillo IT service desk.
Now,
We are experiencing
in my fantasy demo world, we're still having a problem with ERP. Just it's easier to demonstrate that way. So we're going to skip past that.
Automated callback upon resolution. Please press 1. To speak to an agent, please press 2.
So yeah, I think that's my problem. I'm going to press 2. I'm going to talk to an agent, and he's going to help me solve that password problem.
To reset your domain password, please press 1.
Hey, look at that.
For hardware issues,
that's my problem. I'm going to go and reset my domain
IT
password.
services, please press. For authentication, please enter your employee ID followed by the pound sign.
So you can see we can create a multi-factor situation where we can read the caller ID, understand that user is a certain user, translate that to a username, and then cross-reference that against a third-party system like their employee ID or some kind of second factor that you would trust. The user would go and type in what their employee ID would be.
From your identity, please enter the last 4 digits of your social security number.
Maybe the social security number is something you don't want to have, or we just reference a different system, or again, you get to decide the metrics or the measurements of how you're interacting with this. But when they type in that information,
your credentials did not match. Please retry.
I didn't put my real social security number in there. But what would have happened is if I would have put it in correctly, it would have read back to me what my password was. Now, what's great about that is when a user's calling in, they're already in a vulnerable state. They forgot their password. They're calling in for the 4th time this month. That's a big problem for everyone involved. Everyone on the call here knows just the time that we spend on that. I can't remember what the stat is, but is it 30% or 40% of our calls are just reset passwords? And it costs us $60, $70 every time we pick up the phone. Being able to recover those costs so we don't have to pick up the phone is great. And then number 2, for the user's perspective, they're embarrassed about it. They don't like calling in all of the time. It's embarrassing to them. And so this makes it so that they don't have to talk to an agent. They get what they want right away. Now, on the back end, we still need to know about it. So we're going to give us the ability to still open an incident and close an incident associated with that user. So our metrics are not gone. We're still able to interact with the user and know that this interaction happened. However, it just didn't take an agent to pick up the phone and talk to them. So it's a great way to help deflect some of those calls. What's great about this is it kind of gets everyone what they want. The users that still want to call in and still get to an agent and do skills-based routing and do those kinds of things, they can, but we're going to peel off some percentage of those calls. I don't know what that percentage is. Maybe it's 40 or 50% to where they can have their issues resolved without us interacting with them. Now we also have a portal with our password director product that lets you reset your password via web interface or at the control delete screen. But you know, like I said, people still pick up the phone and call into us. Okay, so that's you know, a user calling in, fixing a particular problem. What would happen if we want to kind of go towards the end of the relationship and do offboarding? I want to make sure that this user exits our ecosystem and is no longer using any of our products. So we have the ability to do that, but now let's focus again where this should actually happen. Should this be happening at an IT level? No, because this is not fundamentally an IT related problem. This is an HR related problem. So what we're going to do with HR is have them go through the process of terminating our users. We're simply going to kick off the workflow associated with that and you know, deliver that to the end user. So we're back over here in our HR system. I'm at the contact for a Mr. Michael Myers, and I have a terminate section here. So I'm going to go in here. I could schedule a termination, or you know, in my example, I'm just going to say that we're going to immediately terminate that particular user. And we've all had those hurried meetings at certain times of the day when we know that HR is sitting down with someone and we need to disable and remove and get rid of access. Now we're not as big of a part of that process. You can see what happened there. It started to sign out the user. In my example, I'm able to look through all the VDI systems and see where they're at and log them off the ecosystem. And then I can kick off a workflow to do whatever I want, notify their manager, notify their team, set an out of office on their email, archive their email box. You know, the sky's the limit in terms of what that automation can do to kick in to make it go through an onboarding or offboarding process. And if we jump over here, we can see maybe not the most polite way in the world. I don't know how many HR rules that we're breaking here. But we can fire people via text as well. So I just got a text message here. It says, you know, Mr. M. Myers, you've been terminated from Virtrillo. So you can see that the goal of what our Ivanti's identity solution is attempting to do is make the painful parts of bringing people on into the organization and getting them out of the organization is just so much easier. We still have to sit down and have a large discussion over what that workflow looks like, and I don't want to minimize that. That's a lot of work. You know, you're going to have to get a bunch of people in a room. You have to get someone from HR, someone from facilities, someone from finance, someone from you know, all the different places, and say, okay, what is it like when we hire someone? What are they entitled to? Most all you need for that is just a whiteboard, and you whiteboard out what that looks like. We then take that information and turn that into a workflow. So that's the typical process that we do for creating a request offering, so that you could have a request offering in a service management system go in and do that. The difference being is that we have the ability to automate that task. So when you normally would have said, I need to stop, I need to pause, I need to assign a task to a person now needs to go do something. Add them to a group. A person needs to create their account. A person needs to give them access to an application. We're going to remove that and make it so that it's automatic. So that's the automation engine that's kicking in and doing that. And then our identity platform kind of worries about the entitlements. Should you have access to this application? You know, all of the salespeople who are in the Midwest need access rights in Salesforce to do this function on the Midwest accounts. You know, those kinds of integrations can be built so that it's an automatic process, and we don't have to say, well, when Bob hires people, he does it this way, or the user has to call in 3 weeks later and say, hey, I still don't have access to this. You know, we can provision them right up front. All right, I have a couple of questions here really quick. Does this service work with other managed service applications? So I assume we're talking about things like other ITSM platforms. You know, the answer for that is yes. Our identity platform is independent from service management. It works as a standalone entitlements platform. So the concept of who a person is and managing that person and their attributes and their entitlements is kind of standalone. And let me show you a tiny bit what that looks like on the back end here. So I'm going to log into my Identity Director console and talk about that a little bit because I think this is a very important distinction, because a lot of other organizations are going to come back and say, oh, well, our service management platform has onboarding as part of its process. And probably what it has is it has automation. It doesn't have identity management. And the reason there's a distinction between the two of them is we have sorry, let me log in here really quick. We have multiple different sources of truth very often when we are dealing with different databases. So I'm sure in your organization, you have things like, well, we have an HR system, but you know, HR is not everything. It doesn't have the payroll information. We have a separate payroll database for that. And that's interesting and all, but you know what? It doesn't have the memberships. Those are over in Active Directory. Use Active Directory groups for that. Oh, well, that's interesting and all, but our finance application has a different set of information. And so the problem is that there isn't really one place that understands the identity of a user. We just have a bunch of different stuff, bunch of different buckets. And so what happens with the concept of Identity Director is we're going to act like a metadatabase where we're going to pull in attributes from those various systems. We're going to say, I want to have the payroll ID brought over. I want to have the HR hire date brought over. I want to have maybe from Salesforce, the geographies that they're supposed to manage. We're going to pull those together, and we're going to store them at the attribute level. So our attributes is where we're going to pull in multiple pieces of data from disparate systems and store them in our metadatabase. That way, when we start to do different actions, we can make centralized decisions. So we have something called an entitlement. So an entitlement can be an application, it can be a function, it could be a permission, you know, it can be a request. So any one of these entitlements that I have, you know, here's the ability to use the Abu Dhabi color printer. That's going to be an entitlement that I want to make sure that I have control over, right? So, for example, my qualification. Not everyone is going to qualify for that criteria. So in this case, I'm going to pull information over from their location, most likely from Active Directory, so I can understand, you know, only people in Abu Dhabi are going to have the ability to interact with this system or with this particular printer. I don't want other people outside of the ecosystem to be able to do it. The actual execution of this has to do with that workflow where this gives us the ability to make decisions and say, do we need approvals? If something fails, what is the next step that we should go through? So creating a workflow associated with that. So that's why identity is different than maybe an existing service management platform that you have that does onboarding. That's, you know, being able to go create an Active Directory account, that's not identity management, because think about not the adds and the deletions, because hiring people and firing people, you know what, I know it sounds funny, those are the easy parts because they're so black and white. We take them from nothing and we create their account, and when we fire people, we take their account, we disable them or delete them or do something like that. So but when people get promoted, what happens when people change? They move from one department to another department. Those are much more nuanced and much more difficult to understand. Well, now, since we are bringing in information from HR, we are looking at titles, we are looking at entitlements, we have the ability to say, wait a minute, they just moved from the manufacturing department to the shipping department. They should no longer have access to the manufacturing department's applications because we can detect that. Their title has changed. We regularly synchronize with that HR database, and the qualification says they are not qualified for it anymore, and we remove that entitlement. So removing those entitlements and doing it ad hoc, independently from, just when they start or when they stop is a very important part of identity management. So that's truly what separates the difference between identity management and, well, we have a script that creates their Active Directory account. Anyone can do that. Anyone can have a script that creates Active Directory accounts. Ours is a much larger, trying to solve the larger problems of entitlements. So hopefully that answered your question. If it doesn't, please type in another one. Okay, another question here. We're using Ivanti Service Manager, but have not yet set up the onboarding and separations. Let's assume you're giving an employee login access to 15 different secure websites. They're terminated for cause. You need to quickly revoke their access to these different websites. Is there a way to prepare repo that shows this has been done, assuming this all works in ISM? So the short answer is yes, we have the ability to create an audit trail. So from a perspective of who was given what at what times, mine's not very exciting here, but you would see the exact transactional details that would say, here is when the user was given access to it. Here's when an approval was made. Here's exactly the time and second that that particular permission was given out. So when you went and terminated someone and an auditor came back and said, I need to have proof when their access was revoked, you would see every single one of these pieces of information in our transaction or audit trail, showing you down to the second when these different functions happened. One thing that I would throw out the idea of is, remember, we're not a single sign-on tool. This doesn't solve the password management problem of having multiple different applications. So remember, NCSI, we actually sell multiple different products out there. I would steer you towards maybe something like Okta, that is a single sign-on solution that can solve the password problem. One cool thing about that is now it only takes one call from our workflow to go and disable their Okta account, for example, to remove their access to those different systems. So if you need single sign-on and multi-factor, those are things that you'd want to look at Okta for. But when we're talking about creation and entitlements, that's where something like Identity Director comes into play. Okay, how many applications or tool can these services sync with? Let me show you a little bit about the back end of our automation engine. So let me pull that up really quick. Let me find my automation console. The short answer is a lot. And the longer answer is we're gonna have to dig in. I'll show you a website where you can browse through them on your own. So one of the goals of automation is not to create a house of cards. I always joke saying that get 100 programmers in a room and you can automate anything. What are you going to do the day after they leave? Who's going to maintain that? Who's going to write that code? We want to make it so that it is at least readable by a system administrator. I'm not a programmer. Most of the people on the phone here are not programmers either. We're system administrators. I want to be able to show you what it looks like so you could make moves and changes. Maybe not architect it from the ground up, but being able to understand kind of the logic. So here's an example of like creating an Active Directory account. If I want to create an Active Directory account, this GUI-driven interface, I can understand. Okay, I'm going to connect to the Virtual domain. Okay, I don't even know what security context means. Let me click this button. Oh, they made a password, a username and password. That's a fancy way of saying that. Oh, domain controller? Sure. Let's go talk to that domain controller. Okay, where do we want to create it? Oh, I'm going to go and it's going to browse my Active Directory for me. Okay, great. Let's go put it in that particular OU. And then you can do things like parameters. Parameters are just variables. We would have passed over variables like the first name and the last name over this application. But the goal of it is to make it so that it's really easy for you to see kind of how the process works. I don't want to sugarcoat it. This is not some thing you set up in an hour and you're done with it. No, this is complex. You're going to have to sit through those whiteboarding sessions of discussing how the workflow works and the different engines and how the connectors work. It takes absolutely time to get this up and going. But almost certainly the ROI, how much automation we can get out of it, and the results of it are almost always worth the effort. So you're going to see all the common things, the Active Directories, the PowerShells, the Ivanti Endpoint Manager, being able to do printer-related things, change environment variables, play around with shares, do Active Directory moves and changes and OU stuff, connect to Exchange, talk to SCCM, talk to our Ivanti Endpoint Manager, talk to AppV, Hyper-V, Nutanix, VMware. VMware is one of my favorites because as you saw in the entitlement screen here, excuse me, one of the entitlements that we can create is something like adding a virtual machine to the domain. That's not something to do with hiring a person. And so that's why identity, although we kind of frame it as, when we think about hiring and firing, everything in the middle is just a big giant mess. There's lots of stuff going on there. So we want to make sure that we have identity and entitlement for those. So look at what my workflow is for adding a machine to the domain. That's complex. You need a name. You need to make sure the name doesn't exist. It needs to get approved by someone. We need to add it to the DNS record. We need to go through the whole process. So it doesn't have to be just hiring and firing people. Oftentimes these end up being other systems as well. So being able to connect to third-party systems, VMware, Citrix, Salesforce, Office 365, REST API gets us to be able to connect to anything that doesn't already have a connector built into it. Talk to Mac OS, OS X, Salesforce, ServiceNow, AirWatch, all the ones that I don't have in here. There's a button here that takes us to a website, the marketplace for Ivanti, that lets you go and browse through and download more of them. So I don't have them all imported into my console here. If there's something that you're curious, oh yeah, we have been meaning to integrate with Talkdesk. Well, here you go. We can create, update, and close Talkdesk incidents from inside of our automation engine. So we have a large catalog of that. I think it's something like 300 connectors built out today. If anything that doesn't have a connector, we can use the REST API and make calls. Also, if you can communicate with it electronically, there's a good chance we can automate it. In here, we have in our section called Advanced, execute a command, talk to a SQL database, email someone, pop up with a message box, run a secure shell. Maybe it's an old funky system and I have to SSH into it and run a command. Great, let's do that. Do a REST API, send out an SNMP trap, run a PowerShell script. So there's a good chance we can automate even if we don't have a connector, or even if we don't have something fancy like a REST API. We fall back to these more legacy technologies. Another question is identity director pricing based on the number of technicians, number of users, or something else based on the number of users. So how many users do you have in your organization that we're going to be managing the life cycle of? And it's more than just the people you're hiring, firing. Essentially, just count up all your employees. That's how our licensing is based. Okay, does Identity Director integrate with Ivanti's Service Manager service catalog? Absolutely. So all of the workflow and decisions and things that you saw me showing off here, they don't have to be done in this workflow engine. They can be done in Service Manager's workflow engine. So for example, let me pop up really quick. I have my Service Manager. Let's log into it really quick. One great way to dip your toe in the water is with the automation component. So I talk to a lot of customers and they say, that's great, that's awesome, but I don't have a month to sit down and beat up the HR people, the facilities people, and try and figure out this process. They're not going to work with me. It's a political problem. I just hate the tasks that get created as part of a workflow for creating users. So if you already have an onboarding workflow, you can just add automation to it. So I'm going to open up a workflow that I have here just to fulfill Chrome, for example, that normally would have had a task. If we bring automation to the table, over here on the side, you can see I now have an integration with Ivanti Automation. I can then click and drag this over and create it as part of my workflow and have the different connectors connect into it. And this is going to pull up what are called run books. So these are the run books that exist over here on my automation system. So they're kind of back here. These are what the run books look like. Run books are just a series of tasks that we're going to execute. So now you can see that if I normally already have a workflow, it's already there, just it has a task assigned to a technician to go and do something that could be automated. I can replace that with a run book. The automation kicks in, executes that, and then I don't have to have a task anymore. So a great way to dip your toe in the water if service management, or excuse me, identity management is maybe a little bit too big. Let's talk about just starting with automation and running with that. Okay, I think I've gone through all the questions. If anyone else has a remaining question, please type it in the Q&A box for now. If we didn't have time, or you have something more complex, or you have a larger question, you can always ask me. I have my contact information here at the end of the presentation. I just want to talk about a couple of other things. We talked about the Ivanti suite of products today. We did a very, very, very high-level overview of just a few of these. We talked on some of the identity management. We showed a little bit about service management, our voice automation. We talked about some of our security and endpoint management, but that was very, very high level. If you want to know anything more or in detail, or kind of have any more complex questions, please let me know. I'm happy to have a longer conversation about you. We also didn't even talk about our cloud, which is a really cool new technology for real time, being able to understand where the devices are, where they're at, what's running on them, who's running what firewall, a really cool real time analysis. Far too many times with a lot of our technologies, it's, well, here's the last time it reported in 12 hours ago what the status was, but that's just not good enough. So real time tries to make that as close to 0 seconds as possible. Here's the last question, and it's a complicated one, so I'll have to give it to Pamela. Can I explain the difference between standard and enterprise licensing in automation? So I can. It's complex, and there's a knowledge base article that talks about that. So I'm gonna have to pull that up, and actually it may be in the help documentation around our automation. So give me a second here and I'll pull that up. Like I said, the gist of it is it depends on exactly what context of what you're going to do inside of it. So it's not a black and white process. It is very gray. So this is close to the right answer, but this doesn't detail the exact specifics because this is mostly talking about trial editions. So let me find the answer and send that out to Pamela on exactly how you do that. But there's a specific thing that says, oh, well, if you're going to run this action in this context, then yes, it requires this specific license. So we'll get that answer out to you.
We had an anonymous question as why we weren't actually dressed up today or didn't have face on our paint. So I'm saying that because we just started this whole video and this new platform, that's scary enough to see these beautiful faces. So a lot of firsts today. So maybe, how about next Halloween, Brian, we promise to dress up. How about that?
I say for our Thanksgiving webinar, it could be.
You want to dress up like pilgrims and?
Great idea. I'll be the Indians.
Okay, Native Americans. Okay.
There you go.
And another first today too is I secretly went live on YouTube today. So we are definitely in the 21st century now. So great job today. I think you did awesome. So I'll let you close it up here. But I've got backpack for Angela, Amazon gift card for Jonathan. Pamela gets the $50 K1 gift card, and the other three folks, Teresa, Paul, and Dave, I've got $25 K1 gift cards we can give away to them. Brian, how about that?
Sounds great.
Happy Halloween.
All right, thank you everyone for attending. Here's my contact information. If you have any questions, please hit me up. I'm happy to go in more detail, but thanks for coming, and everyone stay safe tonight. So thanks everyone.